Before Macbeth's madness and Iago's schemes, there was Richard III, Shakespeare's first great villain. Twisted in body and darker still in soul, Richard is a character who lies, kills, and manipulates his way to the throne, with chilling charm and ruthless ambition. But beyond the crown and the carnage lies a tragedy of power, of identity, and of a man consumed by his own hunger for control. In this video, we explore the tragedy of Richard III, a masterpiece of deceit, downfall, and dramatic genius that introduced the world to a villain both monstrous and unforgettable. In the shadowed annals of English history, few figures loom as large or as darkly enigmatic as Richard III. Shakespeare's rendition of this monarch, immortalized in Richard III, is not merely a historical account but a masterclass in the art of villainy, a character study so rich and complex that it continues to captivate audiences centuries after its creation. As Shakespeare's first great villain, Richard emerges not as a mere antagonist but as a force of nature, a man whose ambition burns with such intensity that it consumes all who dare stand in his path. To understand him fully is to delve into the intricate web of ambition, power, and moral decay that defines his journey from Duke of Gloucester to King of England, and ultimately to his tragic demise. The play opens with one of the most electrifying soliloquies in dramatic literature, Richard's chilling declaration of intent. "Now is the winter of our discontent," he begins, setting the stage for a tale steeped in political intrigue and personal vendettas. From the outset, Richard presents himself as an outsider, cursed by physical deformity and societal disdain. Yet, rather than succumb to self-pity, he channels his bitterness into a relentless pursuit of power. His deformed spine becomes both a literal and metaphorical symbol of his twisted psyche, a man warped not just by his body but by the world's rejection of him. "I am determined to prove a villain," he declares, embracing his role with gleeful abandon. This early proclamation serves as a thesis statement for the entire play, signaling to the audience that they are witnessing the rise of a figure who thrives on chaos and manipulation. Central to Richard's allure is his unapologetic amorality. Unlike other Shakespearean characters who wrestle with guilt or conscience, Richard operates with a chilling clarity of purpose. He views morality as a tool to be wielded, not a code to be followed. His charm lies in his intelligence and wit. He is a master manipulator who uses language as deftly as a swordsman wields steel. Whether seducing Lady Anne over her husband's corpse or orchestrating the downfall of his own brother, King Edward IV, Richard's schemes are as audacious as they are calculated. Each act of betrayal is executed with surgical precision, leaving his victims bewildered and powerless. Yet, Richard's brilliance is also his undoing. His insatiable hunger for power blinds him to the consequences of his actions, sowing seeds of rebellion among those he once controlled. The very qualities that make him compelling, his cunning, ruthlessness, and charisma, ultimately isolate him. By the time he ascends the throne, his reign is built on a foundation of blood and betrayal. Teetering precariously under the weight of his crimes, Shakespeare paints Richard not as a monster devoid of humanity but as a deeply flawed individual whose ambition spirals out of control. In doing so, he crafts a tragedy that transcends its historical context, offering timeless insights into the corrupting influence of unchecked desire. As we embark on this 12-chapter exploration of Richard III, we will witness the full arc of Shakespeare's first great villain, from his initial machinations to his climactic fall at Bosworth Field. Each chapter will delve deeper into the themes of ambition, power, and moral ambiguity that define the play, while examining how Richard's actions reverberate through the lives of those around him. Through this journey, we will uncover not only the tragedy of Richard III, but also the enduring legacy of a character who forever changed the landscape of dramatic villainy. Richard Plantagenet, later known as Richard III, was born amidst the tumultuous Wars of the Roses, a period defined by internecine strife as noble houses vied for control of the English crown. As the youngest son of Richard, Duke of York, and Cecily Neville, Richard entered a world already fractured by conflict. His father's claim to the throne placed the family at odds with the reigning House of Lancaster, setting the stage for a life marked by political maneuvering and familial discord. From his earliest days, Richard would have been acutely aware of his position within the hierarchy of power, shaped by both privilege and precariousness, while his elder brothers, Edward and George, stood closer to the line of succession. Richard's role was less defined, fostering in him a sense of marginalization that would later fuel his ambitions. The death of Richard's father at the Battle of Wakefield in 1460 left an indelible mark on the young boy. At just 8 years old, Richard witnessed the fragility of power and the brutal cost of failure. His mother, Cecily, became a formidable matriarch, instilling in her children the importance of loyalty to their house and the necessity of resilience in the face of adversity. It was under her guidance that Richard developed a keen awareness of the political landscape, learning to navigate the treacherous waters of court intrigue. However, it was not just the external pressures of war that shaped him. His physical deformities, historically debated but central to his portrayal in Shakespeare's play, played a pivotal role in shaping his identity. Legends of his hunched back and withered arm, whether exaggerated or accurate, marked him as an outsider even within his own family. This perceived inadequacy likely deepened his resentment and sharpened his resolve to prove himself worthy of recognition. Richard's adolescence coincided with the rise of his brother, Edward I, who claimed the throne in 1461 following the Lancastrian defeat at Towton. Edward's victory brought the House of York to prominence, but it also thrust Richard into a new arena of opportunity and danger. Appointed Duke of Gloucester at the tender age of 18, Richard quickly distinguished himself as a capable military commander and administrator. His campaigns in the north of England earned him a reputation for decisiveness and loyalty, endearing him to the local gentry and solidifying his influence in the region. Yet, beneath this veneer of service lay an ambition that grew with each passing year. Richard's successes on the battlefield were not merely acts of duty but stepping stones toward greater aspirations. He began to envision himself not as a mere supporter of his brother's reign but as a contender for power in his own right. Key relationships during this formative period further shaped Richard's worldview. His bond with his elder brother George, Duke of Clarence, was particularly complex, oscillating between camaraderie and rivalry. Both men shared a sense of entitlement stemming from their royal bloodline. Yet George's erratic behavior and frequent clashes with Edward often left Richard positioned as the more dependable sibling. This dynamic allowed Richard to cultivate an image of steadfastness and reliability, masking the calculating nature that simmered beneath. Meanwhile, his interactions with Edward revealed a more nuanced relationship. Though loyal outwardly, Richard harbored a quiet frustration at being overshadowed by his charismatic and popular brother. Edward's reign, marked by indulgence and favoritism, provided Richard with ample opportunity to observe the vulnerabilities of power and the ease with which it could be undermined. By the time Richard reached adulthood, his ambition had crystallized into a driving force. The deaths of key Lancastrian figures, coupled with the consolidation of Yorkist rule, created a vacuum of authority that Richard was uniquely positioned to exploit. His experiences in the north, where he ruled with near autonomy, honed his skills in governance and diplomacy, preparing him for the larger stage of national politics. More importantly, these years reinforced his belief in the necessity of ruthless pragmatism. Richard learned that loyalty was a currency to be traded, alliances were tools to be manipulated, and trust was a luxury afforded only to the unwary. These lessons would serve him well in the years to come, as he embarked on the path that would lead him to the throne and ultimately to his downfall. Thus, Richard's early years laid the groundwork for his transformation from a marginalized younger son to a figure of immense political consequence. The interplay of personal grievances, familial dynamics, and historical circumstances forged a man whose ambitions knew no bounds. As Shakespeare captures so vividly in his play, Richard's rise was not merely a product of circumstance, but a testament to his singular determination to seize what he believed was rightfully his, even if it meant plunging England into chaos. As Richard III ascended the ranks of power, his methods grew increasingly intricate and merciless, weaving a labyrinthine web of deceit that ensnared friend and foe alike. Central to his strategy was the exploitation of familial bonds, transforming them into instruments of betrayal. His brother George, Duke of Clarence, became one of the earliest casualties of Richard's ambition. Once a potential rival to the throne, Clarence's erratic behavior and strained relationship with Edward IV made him vulnerable to Richard's manipulations. Sensing an opportunity, Richard orchestrated a campaign of whispers and insinuations, planting seeds of suspicion in Edward's mind about Clarence's loyalty. The culmination of this scheme saw Clarence imprisoned in the Tower of London, falsely accused of treason. Even as Clarence pleaded his innocence, Richard remained unmoved, ensuring his brother's execution by drowning him in a barrel of Malmsey wine, a grotesque act that underscored the depths of Richard's cruelty. Equally chilling was Richard's treatment of his nephews, the young princes Edward IV and Richard of Shrewsbury. Following Edward IV's untimely death, Richard seized the role of Lord Protector, ostensibly to safeguard the realm until his nephew's coronation. However, his true intentions soon became apparent. With calculated precision, Richard invalidated Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville, declaring their children illegitimate and thus ineligible for the throne. The boys, now stripped of their titles, were confined to the Tower of London under the guise of protection. Yet, as days turned to weeks, their fate grew increasingly ominous. Though Shakespeare's play leaves their ultimate demise ambiguous, historical accounts suggest that Richard ordered their murder, eliminating any lingering threats to his claim. The disappearance of the princes in the tower remains one of history's most haunting mysteries, a testament to Richard's willingness to sacrifice even the most innocent lives in his quest for power. Beyond his immediate family, Richard extended his reach to the broader political landscape, dismantling alliances and consolidating his grip on authority. His manipulation of the nobility was particularly insidious, as he exploited their fears and ambitions to secure their loyalty. Failing that, their silence. One notable example was his handling of Lord Hastings, a staunch supporter of Edward IV and a trusted member of the Royal Council. Sensing Hastings's growing unease over Richard's ascent, Richard acted swiftly to neutralize the threat. During a council meeting, he accused Hastings of conspiring against him, citing a fabricated plot involving witchcraft and sedition. Without trial or evidence, Hastings was summarily executed, his severed head displayed as a grim warning to others who might oppose Richard's rule. Such displays of ruthlessness served not only to eliminate rivals, but also to instill fear in those who remained. Perhaps the most audacious of Richard's schemes was his courtship of Lady Anne Neville, widow Henry VI's son and heir, Edward of Westminster. Their union was not born of love, but of strategic calculation. By marrying Anne, Richard sought to legitimize his claim to power, while simultaneously erasing the memory of the Lancastrian dynasty. What makes this act particularly striking is the manner in which Richard achieved it. He pursued Anne even as she mourned her husband, whom Richard himself had helped kill at the Battle of Tewkesbury. His persistence bordered on the macabre. Legend has it that he intercepted her funeral procession, declaring his love over her husband's coffin. Whether through persuasion, coercion, or sheer force of will, Richard succeeded in winning Anne's hand, turning a symbol of Lancastrian grief into a trophy of Yorkist triumph. Through these actions, Richard demonstrated an unparalleled mastery of deception and psychological warfare. Each move was deliberate, designed to destabilize his opponents while reinforcing his own position. Yet, for all his cunning, Richard's methods carried inherent risks. His reliance on fear and violence bred resentment among those he sought to control, sowing the seeds of rebellion. Moreover, his blatant disregard for moral boundaries alienated potential allies, leaving him increasingly isolated. As Shakespeare portrays him, Richard's brilliance was matched only by his hubris, a fatal combination that would eventually lead to his undoing. For now, however, Richard stood at the pinnacle of power, his path littered with the broken lives of those who had dared to stand in his way. With the chessboard of English politics now cleared of his most formidable adversaries, Richard III ascended to the throne in 1483, a momentous event that marked the zenith of his ambitious designs. His coronation was a spectacle of grandeur, meticulously orchestrated, to project an image of legitimacy and divine sanction. The streets of London were lined with cheering crowds, many of whom were coerced or bribed into participation, while heralds proclaimed Richard as the rightful king chosen by God. Dressed in regal purple and gold, Richard processed through the city atop a white charger, his visage stern yet composed, a mask of authority carefully crafted to conceal the turmoil beneath. The ceremony itself unfolded with all the pomp and solemnity befitting a monarch, complete with anointing oils and the ceremonial crown placed upon his head. Yet, for all its outward splendor, the coronation was a hollow affair, a facade erected to mask the blood-soaked path that had led him to the throne. Once crowned, Richard wasted no time in consolidating his power, implementing policies aimed at stabilizing his reign while simultaneously rooting out dissent. He moved swiftly to address the economic and administrative challenges facing the realm, seeking to present himself as a capable ruler attuned to the needs of his subjects. One of his earliest decrees involved the establishment of a system of legal reforms designed to curb corruption and ensure swift justice. Known as the Acts of Resumption, these measures sought to reclaim lands and titles improperly granted during Edward IV's reign, redistributing wealth to bolster the crown's coffers. On the surface, these reforms appeared altruistic, intended to rectify abuses of power and restore fairness to governance. In reality, they served a dual purpose: to undermine the influence of Edward's former favorites and consolidate Richard's authority over the nobility. By stripping powerful lords of their ill-gotten gains, Richard effectively neutered potential sources of opposition, further securing his grip on the throne. However, Richard's efforts to project stability were undermined by the pervasive atmosphere of mistrust that lingered in the wake of his rise to power. Rumors of the princes in the Tower's disappearance continued to circulate, casting a pall over his reign. Many viewed his ascension as illegitimate, questioning the validity of the claims that had rendered Edward IV's sons bastards. To counter these whispers, Richard launched a propaganda campaign aimed at reshaping public perception. Chroniclers sympathetic to his cause were commissioned to write accounts glorifying his lineage and emphasizing his piety and devotion to the realm. Statues and portraits depicting him as a strong, benevolent ruler proliferated, serving as visual reminders of his supposed righteousness. Yet, despite these efforts, skepticism persisted. The specter of the vanished princes haunted the collective consciousness of England, a silent accusation that shadowed every decree and proclamation issued under Richard's name. Internationally, Richard sought to shore up alliances that might bolster his fragile hold on power. Diplomatic overtures were extended to Scotland, Burgundy, and France, with marriage proposals and trade agreements serving as tools to secure foreign support. Of particular note was his attempt to negotiate a marriage between himself and Joanna of Portugal, a union that promised both political stability and financial benefits. While these efforts initially met with cautious optimism, they ultimately proved insufficient to offset the growing tide of domestic unrest. The instability within England rendered it an unreliable partner, and foreign powers remained wary of committing resources to a regime that seemed perpetually on the brink of collapse. Within his court, Richard's leadership style was marked by a blend of pragmatism and paranoia. He surrounded himself with loyalists who owed their positions directly to him, creating a cadre of advisors beholden to his whims. Chief among these was Francis Laval, a childhood friend whose unwavering allegiance earned him significant influence. Yet, Richard's reliance on such figures did little to alleviate the pervasive sense of insecurity that permeated his administration. Fearful of plots and betrayals, Richard maintained a network of spies and informants, ensuring that even the slightest whisper of dissent was swiftly quashed. Executions and imprisonments became commonplace, further eroding the morale of his inner circle and alienating those who might otherwise have supported him. Despite these challenges, there were moments when Richard's reign hinted at the possibility of enduring success. His commitment to judicial reform earned him grudging respect from some quarters, particularly among commoners who benefited from the newfound efficiency of the courts. Likewise, his military expertise, honed during years of campaigning in the north, positioned him as a capable defender of the realm against external threats. Yet, these achievements were overshadowed by the fundamental flaws at the heart of his rule. The absence of genuine legitimacy, coupled with the widespread perception of his reign as built on treachery, ensured that his grip on power remained tenuous at best. As the months passed, the cracks in Richard's facade began to widen. Rebellions flared across the countryside, fueled by discontented nobles and emboldened by rumors of alternative claimants to the throne. Among these claimants was Henry Tudor, a distant Lancastrian heir living in exile in Brittany. Though initially dismissed as a minor threat, Henry's star began to rise as disaffected factions coalesced around him, pledging their support in exchange for promises of restoration and revenge. For Richard, the emergence of this new challenger represented not only a direct threat to his sovereignty but also a stark reminder of the fragility of his position. No matter how diligently he worked to fortify his rule, the specter of usurpation loomed ever-present, a testament to the volatile foundations upon which his kingdom rested. Thus, Richard's reign, though brief, was a study in contradiction. On one hand, he displayed a remarkable ability to govern, introducing reforms and maintaining order in the face of daunting odds. On the other, His methods, rooted in deceit, violence, and fear, ensured that his rule was perpetually contested. As Shakespeare so poignantly captures in his play, Richard's ascent to the throne was not the culmination of his ambitions but rather the beginning of their unraveling. The crown he coveted so fiercely became a gilded cage, isolating him from allies and exposing him to the very forces he had sought to dominate. As Richard III sat upon the throne, the weight of his deeds began to press heavily upon his soul. Though outwardly resolute, Shakespeare's portrayal reveals a man grappling with the psychological toll of his relentless pursuit of power. The soliloquies that punctuate the play offer glimpses into Richard's inner world, where guilt and paranoia wage a ceaseless battle against his steely resolve. In one such moment, alone in the dim confines of his chambers, Richard reflects on the ghosts of those he has wronged. Clarence, Hastings, the princes in the Tower all haunt him not as external specters but as manifestations of his own conscience. My conscience hath 1,000 several tongues, he laments, his voice trembling with a rare vulnerability. These words reveal not only the depth of his internal conflict, but also the fragility of the confidence he projects to the world. The veneer of invincibility lies a man tormented by the echoes of his crimes, unable to escape the gnawing realization that his victories are built on a foundation of ashes. Yet, Richard's response to these stirrings of guilt is neither repentance nor remorse but a fierce determination to suppress them. He clings to the conviction that weakness is a luxury he cannot afford, viewing any hint of doubt as a threat to his survival. His soliloquies often oscillate between moments of introspection and defiant assertions of his own infallibility. Conscience is but a word that cowards use, he declares, attempting to silence the voices that plague him. This internal dialogue underscores the duality of Richard's character, a man torn between acknowledging his humanity and denying it altogether. His refusal to confront his guilt outright leads to a dangerous spiral of rationalization, wherein he justifies his actions as necessary evils in the pursuit of greatness. To Richard, morality is not a guiding principle but a malleable construct, bent to suit his purposes. This mindset allows him to compartmentalize his atrocities, relegating them to the realm of necessity rather than choice. Paranoia, too, becomes an ever-present companion in Richard's reign, feeding off the same insecurities that fuel his ambition. The more he consolidates power, the more he perceives enemies lurking in every shadow. His dreams, once filled with visions of triumph, now brim with foreboding imagery. In one haunting sequence, Richard envisions the spirits of his victims appearing before him, each uttering curses that foreshadow his downfall. Despair and die, they cry, their voices echoing like thunder in the recesses of his mind. These apparitions are not merely supernatural phenomena, but projections of his deepest fears, fears of retribution, of losing control, of being undone by the very mechanisms he employed to ascend. The dream sequence serves as a psychological reckoning, forcing Richard to confront the inevitability of his fate. Yet, even in this moment of clarity, he refuses to yield, instead doubling down on his resolve. "Let me have all the posts," he mutters, clinging to the illusion of invulnerability even as the walls close in around him. This descent into paranoia manifests in increasingly erratic behavior, as Richard's mistrust extends beyond his enemies to encompass even his closest allies. He begins to see betrayal in every gesture, conspiracy in every whispered conversation. His interactions with those around him grow colder and more calculating, driven by a need to assert dominance and maintain control. when Buckingham, his most trusted confidant, hesitates to support his plans. Richard's reaction is swift and unforgiving. Once a pillar of loyalty, Buckingham is cast aside without hesitation, his usefulness eclipsed by Richard's growing suspicion. This incident highlights the corrosive nature of Richard's paranoia, which erodes the bonds of trust that sustain any ruler. By alienating those who might have stood by him, Richard ensures his isolation, leaving himself vulnerable to the rising tide of rebellion. The psychological toll of Richard's actions is further compounded by his inability to reconcile his public persona with his private doubts. To the world, he remains the consummate villain, a figure of unrelenting ambition and ruthless pragmatism. Yet, in solitude, he is revealed as a man burdened by the weight of his choices. This dichotomy creates a profound sense of dissonance, as Richard struggles to reconcile the person he has become with the person he once imagined himself to be. His soliloquies capture this tension, oscillating between moments of self-loathing and defiant pride. "I am myself alone," he proclaims, a statement that encapsulates both his isolation and his refusal to seek redemption. For Richard, there can be no turning back. The path he has chosen demands absolute commitment, even if it means sacrificing his peace of mind. Ultimately, Richard's psychological state becomes a mirror of his reign, fractured, unstable, and consumed by contradictions. His inability to confront his guilt and paranoia leaves him trapped in a cycle of self-destruction, where each attempt to assert control only deepens his descent into madness. As Shakespeare portrays him, Richard is not merely a villain but a tragic figure, a man undone by the very qualities that propelled him to greatness. His soliloquies, dreams, and interactions reveal a psyche unraveling under the strain of ambition, a cautionary tale of how the pursuit of power can consume even the most formidable of minds. As Richard III's reign descended further into tyranny, the fabric of loyalty that once bound his supporters began to fray, giving rise to a groundswell of rebellion. The seeds of dissent, planted during his ascent to power, now sprouted into open defiance, fueled by widespread disillusionment and the emergence of credible challengers. Chief among these was Henry Tudor, a distant Lancastrian heir, whose exile in Brittany had transformed him from a forgotten pretender into a rallying point for those opposed to Richard's rule. Henry's claim to the throne, though tenuous by traditional standards, gained strength as dissatisfaction with Richard's governance spread. Nobles, clergy, and commoners alike began to see Henry not merely as an alternative, but as a symbol of hope, a chance to cleanse England of the corruption and bloodshed that had marked Richard's reign. The rebellion against Richard was not a spontaneous uprising but a carefully orchestrated movement, rooted in strategic alliances and calculated risks. Key figures, such as the Earl of Oxford, Sir William Stanley, and Lord Thomas Stanley, played pivotal roles in organizing resistance. These men, though initially cautious in their opposition, were galvanized by Richard's increasing brutality and his reliance on fear to maintain control. The execution of William Hastings, a respected statesman, had been a turning point, exposing the lengths to which Richard would go to eliminate perceived threats. Such acts of savagery alienated even those who had once tolerated his rule, driving them into the arms of Henry Tudor. The Stanleys, in particular, wielded significant influence, commanding vast networks of soldiers and resources. Their decision to hedge their bets, pledging nominal loyalty to Richard while secretly supporting Henry, proved instrumental in tipping the balance of power. The rebels' motivations were as varied as their backgrounds. For some, the impetus was personal, vengeance for loved ones lost to Richard's machinations, or the restoration of lands and titles confiscated under his regime. Others were driven by ideological convictions, viewing Richard's usurpation of the throne as a violation of divine order. Still, there were those who joined the rebellion out of sheer opportunism, sensing that Henry's rise offered a chance to elevate their own status. This diversity of motives underscored the breadth of opposition to Richard's rule, transcending class and regional divides to unite disparate factions under a single banner. The rebels' rallying cry for King Henry and the true line of Lancaster resonated across the countryside, drawing recruits from towns and villages weary of Richard's oppressive policies. Henry Tudor, for his part, emerged as a surprisingly adept leader, leveraging his charisma and diplomatic acumen to forge a cohesive coalition. Though inexperienced in the art of kingship, Henry understood the importance of symbolism and legitimacy. He secured a papal dispensation for his planned marriage to Elizabeth of York, Edward IV's eldest daughter, framing his campaign as a unifying effort to heal the wounds of the Wars of the Roses. This strategic alliance promised not only to legitimize his claim but also to end the bitter feud between the houses of Lancaster and York. The prospect of peace, coupled with Henry's promise of reform, proved irresistible to many who had grown weary of perpetual conflict. The logistical challenges of mounting a rebellion were immense, requiring meticulous planning and coordination. Henry and his supporters faced the daunting task of amassing troops, securing supplies, and navigating treacherous terrain, all while evading Richard's spies and agents. The French king, Charles V, provided crucial support in the form of ships and funds, enabling Henry to cross the Channel and land at Milford Haven in Wales. From there, Henry marched eastward, gathering followers and momentum with each step. His progress was slow but steady, as news of his advance spread like wildfire, inspiring defections from Richard's ranks. Towns along the route opened their gates to him, their inhabitants eager to throw off the yoke of Richard's tyranny. Richard, for his part, responded to the rebellion with characteristic ferocity, mobilizing his forces to crush the uprising before it could gain further traction. His military experience, honed during years of campaigning in the north, made him a formidable opponent. Yet, his reliance on fear and coercion had eroded the loyalty of his troops, many of whom fought out of obligation rather than conviction. Morale within his army was low, exacerbated by rumors of Henry's growing strength and the uncertainty surrounding Richard's legitimacy. The king's attempts to rally his men with fiery speeches and promises of reward fell flat, as the specter of defeat loomed ever larger. The stage was set for a decisive confrontation, a clash of wills that would determine the fate of England. As Richard's forces converged on Bosworth Field, the air crackled with tension. On one side stood a man desperate to preserve the throne he had fought so hard to attain. On the other, a challenger buoyed by the hopes of a nation yearning for change. The battle that ensued would not only decide the immediate future of the realm, but also cement the legacies of both Richard III and Henry Tudor in the annals of history. The morning of August 22, 1385, dawned gray and misty over Bosworth Field, a sprawling expanse of marshy terrain that would soon bear witness to one of the most pivotal battles in English history. Richard III, clad in armor emblazoned with the white boar of his personal emblem, surveyed the field from atop his warhorse. His gaze was steely, his jaw set with the unwavering determination of a man who had staked everything on this moment. Arrayed before him were the forces of Henry Tudor, smaller in number but buoyed by the fervent belief that their cause was just. The air was thick with anticipation, the faint murmur of soldiers checking weapons and adjusting armor punctuated by the occasional neigh of a restless horse. As the two armies prepared to meet, the stakes could not have been higher for Richard. It was a fight to preserve his hard-won throne. For Henry, it was a chance to claim a destiny long denied. The opening moves of the battle were marked by cautious maneuvering. As both sides sought to gain a tactical advantage, Richard's forces occupied the high ground, a strategic position that allowed them to survey the enemy's movements and launch attacks with greater force. His artillery, positioned along the ridgeline, began raining cannon fire onto Henry's advancing troops, sowing chaos and confusion. Yet, Henry's forces pressed forward with surprising discipline, their lines holding firm despite the bombardment. Leading the charge was the Earl of Oxford, a seasoned commander whose experience in warfare proved invaluable. Under his direction, Henry's men executed a series of flanking maneuvers designed to stretch Richard's defenses and create openings for assault. The initial skirmishes were fierce but inconclusive, with neither side able to gain a decisive upper hand. It was Richard himself who broke the stalemate, launching a bold and unexpected cavalry charge directly at Henry's position. Mounted on his warhorse and wielding a lance, Richard cut a fearsome figure as he surged forward, his personal guard forming a wedge behind him. The move was calculated to inspire terror and disrupt the enemy's command structure, targeting Henry directly in an attempt to decapitate the rebellion. For a brief, electrifying moment, it seemed as though Richard's gambit might succeed. He broke through the front lines, closing in on Henry with startling speed. Accounts describe the scene with almost mythic grandeur. Richard, shouting defiance, locked in combat with those who sought to shield Henry from his wrath. His prowess as a warrior was undeniable, and for a fleeting instant, it appeared that his sheer force of will might carry the day. Yet, the tide of battle shifted with devastating suddenness. The betrayal of the Stanley brothers, whose loyalties had been uncertain throughout the campaign, proved decisive. Sir William Stanley, observing Richard's charge, finally committed his forces to Henry's side, unleashing a torrent of reinforcements that overwhelmed Richard's dwindling ranks. The sight of fresh troops pouring onto the field shattered the morale of Richard's army, many of whom had already grown disenchanted with their king's rule. Panic spread like wildfire, and the cohesion of Richard's forces began to unravel. Isolated and surrounded, Richard found himself cut off from his retreating soldiers, his once formidable cavalry reduced to a handful of loyal knights. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, Richard refused to surrender. Witnesses recount his final moments with a mixture of awe and horror. Surrounded by enemy soldiers, he fought with a ferocity that bordered on madness, his sword flashing in the dim light as he struck down foes with unrelenting fury. "Treason! Treason!" he reportedly cried, his voice raw with anguish as he realized the extent of the betrayal that had sealed his fate. The end came swiftly but brutally. Struck repeatedly by blows from halberds and swords, Richard fell from his horse and was hacked to death, his body trampled beneath the hooves of advancing cavalry. The crown that had once rested proudly upon his brow was torn from his helmet and placed upon Henry Tudor's head, a symbolic transfer of power that marked the dawn of a new era. The aftermath of the battle was as chaotic as the fighting itself. Richard's body, stripped of its armor and slung over the back of a horse, was paraded through the streets of Leicester as a grim testament to his defeat. The ignominy of his death stood in stark contrast to the grandeur of his reign, a cruel irony that underscored the precarious nature of power. For Henry Tudor, the victory was both a triumph and a vindication. Standing amidst the carnage, he addressed his weary but jubilant troops, promising to usher in an age of peace and reconciliation. The Wars of the Roses, which had ravaged England for decades, were finally at an end. Bosworth Field thus became a crucible of history, a battleground where the fates of two men and two dynasties were irrevocably decided. Richard's audacity and martial skill had nearly turned the tide in his favor, but his reliance on fear and coercion ultimately proved his undoing. In contrast, Henry's ability to inspire loyalty and forge alliances ensured his survival and eventual triumph. The battle's outcome not only reshaped the political landscape of England, but also served as a stark reminder of the fragility of power and the unpredictable nature of war. The dust of Bosworth Field settled, leaving behind a tableau of ruin and rebirth. Richard III's death marked not merely the end of a man, but the conclusion of an era dominated by the Wars of the Roses. His legacy, however, is far from straightforward. It is a tapestry woven with threads of infamy and intrigue, heroism and villainy, leaving historians and scholars divided in their interpretations. To some, Richard remains the archetype of Shakespeare's villainous genius, a tyrant whose thirst for power justified any means, including fratricide and regicide. To others, he is a misunderstood monarch, maligned by Tudor propaganda and misrepresented by literary license. This duality shapes the historiographical debate surrounding his reign, a contentious discourse that continues to evolve with each new discovery and reinterpretation. Historians have long grappled with the question of Richard's culpability in the disappearance of the princes in the Tower, an issue that lies at the heart of his controversial legacy. Traditional narratives, heavily influenced by Tudor chroniclers and Shakespeare's dramatization, portray Richard as the architect of their presumed murders, a crime so heinous that it irreparably tarnished his reputation. Yet, revisionist scholars argue that the evidence against Richard is circumstantial at best, pointing to the lack of definitive proof and the existence of alternative suspects, such as Henry Tudor himself. Archaeological findings, including the discovery of Richard's skeleton in 2012, have added layers of complexity to this debate. The skeletal remains, which revealed signs of scoliosis but no evidence of a withered arm, challenged long-held assumptions about his physical deformities and their role in shaping perceptions of his character. These discoveries have prompted calls for a more nuanced understanding of Richard's reign, urging historians to separate fact from fiction and to consider the broader socio-political context of his time. Public perception of Richard III has undergone significant shifts over the centuries, reflecting changing attitudes toward monarchy, power, and morality. During the Tudor period, Richard was vilified as a usurper and murderer, a narrative cemented by works like Thomas More's History of King Richard III and Shakespeare's eponymous play. These portrayals, though artistically brilliant, were deeply politicized, serving to legitimize the Tudor dynasty by demonizing its predecessor. The Enlightenment brought a measure of skepticism, as thinkers began to question the veracity of historical accounts and the biases of their authors. By the Victorian era, a nascent Richardian movement emerged, championed by figures like Horace Walpole and Clements Markham, who sought to rehabilitate Richard's image. Their efforts laid the groundwork for modern scholarship, which seeks to evaluate Richard's reign on its own terms rather than through the lens of Tudor propaganda. The impact of Richard's story extends far beyond academia, permeating popular culture and shaping the collective imagination. Shakespeare's Richard III remains one of the playwright's most frequently performed works, a testament to its enduring appeal. Actors relish the challenge of portraying Richard's complexity, from his magnetic charisma to his chilling amorality. Laurence Olivier's 1955 film adaptation immortalized the role, presenting Richard as a larger-than-life figure whose villainy is both horrifying and mesmerizing. More recent portrayals, such as Benedict Cumberbatch's performance in the BBC series The Hollow Crown, have sought to humanize Richard, emphasizing his intelligence and vulnerability alongside his ruthlessness. These interpretations reflect evolving cultural attitudes toward power and morality, inviting audiences to engage critically with the questions raised by Richard's story. Richard's influence is also evident in the broader literary canon, where his archetype has inspired countless villains across genres and mediums. From Milton's Satan in Paradise Lost to contemporary anti-heroes in film and television, the figure of the charismatic, morally ambiguous antagonist owes much to Shakespeare's portrayal of Richard. His soliloquies, in particular, have become touchstones for exploring the psychology of evil, offering insight into the inner workings of a mind consumed by ambition. Writers and creators continue to draw inspiration from Richard's story, using it as a lens through which to examine timeless themes of power, betrayal, and redemption. In addition to its artistic resonance, Richard's legacy has tangible implications for modern discussions of historical memory and justice. The discovery of his remains in a Leicester car park sparked a global conversation about the ethics of exhuming historical figures and the responsibilities of preserving their legacies. The subsequent reburial of Richard's remains in Leicester Cathedral, accompanied by solemn ceremonies and public commemorations, underscored the enduring fascination with his life and reign. This event served as a poignant reminder of the intersection between history, memory, and identity, prompting debates about how societies choose to remember and sometimes rehabilitate controversial figures from their past. For some, Richard's reburial represented an act of reconciliation, an opportunity to acknowledge the complexities of his legacy, while honoring him as a king who ruled during turbulent times. For others, it was a contentious gesture, seen as an attempt to whitewash the atrocities attributed to him and elevate a villain to the status of a tragic hero. The resurgence of interest in Richard III has also fueled initiatives aimed at fostering a deeper understanding of the late medieval period. Historical societies, museums, and educational programs have capitalized on the public's fascination with Richard to promote broader engagement with this era of English history. Exhibitions featuring artifacts from the Wars of the Roses, interactive digital reconstructions of Bosworth Field, and guided tours of key locations associated with Richard's life have all contributed to a renewed appreciation for the historical context in which he lived. These efforts not only illuminate the intricacies of 15th-century politics, but also challenge audiences to consider how narratives are constructed and perpetuated over time. Yet, even as Richard's story continues to captivate, it remains a mirror reflecting societal anxieties and aspirations. His rise and fall embody timeless themes that resonate across cultures and epochs: the corrupting influence of power, the fragility of legitimacy, and the moral compromises inherent in the pursuit of ambition. In an age increasingly preoccupied with questions of leadership and accountability, Richard's legacy serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the consequences of governance driven by personal gain rather than collective welfare. At the same time, his complexity invites empathy, encouraging us to recognize the humanity behind the archetype and to grapple with the shades of gray that define so much of human experience. Ultimately, Richard III occupies a unique place in the pantheon of historical figures whose stories transcend their immediate context to become enduring symbols. Whether viewed as a villain, a victim, or something in between, his legacy endures because it challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, morality, and the ways in which history is written and rewritten. As new evidence emerges and interpretations evolve, Richard's story will undoubtedly continue to inspire debate, reflection, and reinterpretation, ensuring that his shadow looms large over the corridors of both history and imagination. At the heart of Richard III lies a profound exploration of ambition, a force that drives characters to extraordinary heights, yet simultaneously corrodes their moral compasses. Shakespeare masterfully portrays ambition not merely as a personal trait, but as a systemic phenomenon, one that shapes the political landscape and determines the fates of nations. Through Richard's relentless pursuit of the crown, the play delves into the dual nature of ambition, its capacity to inspire greatness and its propensity to engender destruction. Richard's journey from Duke of Gloucester to King of England exemplifies this duality. His single-minded determination to ascend the throne propels him through a labyrinth of deceit and violence, showcasing his unparalleled cunning and resilience. Yet, this same ambition blinds him to the ethical boundaries he crosses, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. By the time he seizes power, Richard has sacrificed not only the lives of others but also his own humanity, reduced to a figure consumed by paranoia and self-loathing. Shakespeare thus presents ambition as a double-edged sword, capable of elevating individuals to positions of authority, while simultaneously eroding the very qualities that make them fit to rule. Moral decay operates as a corollary to ambition, serving as both a consequence and a catalyst of Richard's actions. From the outset, Richard rejects conventional morality, viewing it as a tool to be manipulated rather than a code to be followed. His soliloquies reveal a man who sees no contradiction in committing atrocities while maintaining a veneer of civility. "Conscience is but a word that cowards use," he declares, dismissing guilt as a weakness unworthy of his ambitions. This rejection of moral accountability enables him to justify his crimes, framing them as necessary steps toward achieving his goals. However, Shakespeare subtly undermines this rationalization by depicting the psychological toll of Richard's actions. The dreams that haunt him before Bosworth Field, the spectral visitations of those he has wronged, are not mere supernatural phenomena but manifestations of his fractured conscience. These apparitions underscore the inevitability of reckoning, suggesting that moral decay carries its own form of punishment. By portraying Richard's descent into paranoia and despair, Shakespeare illustrates how the abandonment of ethical principles ultimately leads to self-destruction. Power, too, emerges as a central theme, intertwined with ambition and moral decay. In Richard III, power is depicted as both a coveted prize and a corrosive force. Richard's ascent to the throne exemplifies the former, as he leverages every available resource, political alliances, military prowess, and rhetorical skill to secure his position. Yet, once in power, he discovers that maintaining control requires constant vigilance and ruthlessness. His reliance on fear and coercion alienates potential allies, leaving him increasingly isolated. This dynamic reflects Shakespeare's broader commentary on the precarious nature of authority. Power, in his portrayal, is not a static possession but a volatile entity that must be continually reinforced and defended. Those who wield it without regard for justice or loyalty risk losing it altogether. As Richard's ultimate downfall attests, Shakespeare further complicates these themes by situating them within the context of divine right and legitimacy. The Wars of the Roses had already destabilized traditional notions of monarchy, creating a climate where claims to the throne were contested and often tenuous. Richard exploits this instability, using propaganda and legal maneuvering to legitimize his rule. Yet, his efforts are undercut by the pervasive sense that his kingship is illegitimate, a product of treachery rather than divine sanction. This tension between appearance and reality highlights the fragility of power when divorced from moral authority. Shakespeare suggests that true leadership requires more than strategic acumen or brute force. It demands a foundation of trust and righteousness. Without these elements, even the most formidable ruler is vulnerable to rebellion and ruin. Through these interwoven themes, Shakespeare crafts a narrative that transcends its historical setting to offer timeless insights into the human condition. Ambition, moral decay, and power are universal forces, shaping the destinies of individuals and societies alike. By examining their interplay in Richard III, Shakespeare invites audiences to reflect on the costs of unchecked desire and the responsibilities that accompany authority. The tragedy of Richard III is not merely the story of a man undone by his flaws, but a meditation on the enduring struggle between aspiration and integrity, struggle that continues to resonate across centuries. To fully appreciate the magnitude of Richard III's villainy, one must situate him within the broader pantheon of Shakespearean antagonists, each of whom embodies distinct facets of malevolence. While characters like Iago, Macbeth, and Lady Macbeth share Richard's capacity for manipulation and ruthlessness, they differ significantly in their motivations, methods, and moral frameworks. Richard stands apart not only for his unapologetic amorality but also for his theatricality and self-awareness, qualities that render him uniquely compelling as a figure of villainy. Comparing Richard to these other antagonists illuminates the nuances of his character and underscores why he occupies such a pivotal role in Shakespeare's dramatic universe. Iago, the insidious manipulator of Othello, serves as a natural point of comparison. Both Richard and Iago are masters of deception, employing language as a weapon to orchestrate chaos and destruction. However, their motivations diverge sharply. Iago's villainy stems from a toxic cocktail of jealousy, resentment, and insecurity. His actions are driven by personal grievances against Othello and Cassio. In contrast, Richard's motives are far more abstract and existential. He embraces villainy, not out of malice toward specific individuals, but as a means of asserting his identity and securing his place in a world that has marginalized him. "I am determined to prove a villain," he declares, framing his actions as an existential choice rather than a reaction to external circumstances. This distinction renders Richard's villainy more deliberate and philosophical, elevating him beyond the realm of petty schemers like Iago. Macbeth, another iconic Shakespearean antagonist, shares Richard's ambition and willingness to commit atrocities in pursuit of power. Yet, Macbeth's journey is marked by a profound internal conflict that Richard entirely lacks. Haunted by visions and tormented by guilt, Macbeth becomes a tragic figure undone by his own conscience. His famous soliloquy, "Is this a dagger which I see before me?" captures the psychological torment that accompanies his descent into tyranny. Richard, by contrast, exhibits no such hesitation or remorse. His soliloquies are not expressions of doubt but declarations of intent, delivered with chilling clarity. Where Macbeth wrestles with the moral implications of his actions, Richard revels in them, viewing guilt as a weakness to be discarded. This absence of inner turmoil makes Richard a more singularly focused and unnerving adversary, devoid of the redeeming vulnerability that complicates Macbeth's character. Lady Macbeth provides yet another lens through which to examine Richard's uniqueness. Like Richard, she is a consummate manipulator, goading her husband into regicide and orchestrating the murder of Duncan. Her initial resolve mirrors Richard's steely determination, as she invokes dark spirits to unsex her and fill her with cruelty. Yet, unlike Richard, Lady Macbeth cannot sustain her amorality indefinitely. The weight of her crimes eventually overwhelms her, culminating in her descent into madness and suicide. Richard, however, remains steadfast in his villainy until the bitter end, refusing to succumb to the psychological collapse that afflicts Lady Macbeth. This resilience underscores Richard's exceptionalism. He is not merely a villain, but a force of nature, impervious to the moral and emotional constraints that weaken others. What truly sets Richard apart is his theatricality and self-awareness, qualities that blur the line between villain and performer. Unlike Iago, Macbeth, or Lady Macbeth, who operate in relative secrecy, Richard thrives in the spotlight, relishing the opportunity to display his cunning. His soliloquies are not private musings, but performances designed to engage the audience, inviting them to marvel at his audacity and wit. And therefore, since I cannot prove a lover to entertain these fair well-spoken days, I am determined to prove a villain, he announces, casting himself as the protagonist of his own dark drama. This meta-theatrical dimension transforms Richard into more than just a character. He becomes a commentator on the nature of villainy itself, challenging audiences to admire his brilliance even as they recoil from his deeds. Moreover, Richard's physical deformity adds another layer of complexity to his villainy, distinguishing him from Shakespeare's other antagonists. While Iago and Macbeth derive their menace from psychological manipulation, Richard's hunched back and withered arm serve as visual markers of his outsider status. These perceived imperfections fuel his resentment and drive his ambition, making him a figure of both pity and revulsion. Shakespeare uses Richard's deformity not as a justification for his actions, but as a lens through which to explore societal prejudices and the marginalization of difference. In doing so, he creates a villain who is not merely evil but profoundly human, a man shaped by the world's rejection of him. By juxtaposing Richard with other Shakespearean antagonists, we gain a deeper understanding of what makes him so singularly captivating. His unflinching immorality, theatrical flair, and existential embrace of villainy set him apart from characters like Iago, Macbeth, and Lady Macbeth, whose flaws and vulnerabilities render them more conventionally tragic. Richard's lack of remorse and his ability to maintain composure in the face of mounting adversity make him a more formidable and enigmatic figure, a true archetype of villainy, whose influence extends far beyond the confines of Richard III. Shakespeare's Richard III stands as a testament to his unparalleled ability to weave complex characters, intricate plots, and evocative language into a cohesive and compelling narrative. Central to the play's enduring impact is Shakespeare's innovative use of dramatic structure, which transforms historical events into a tightly orchestrated tragedy. The five-act framework, a hallmark of Elizabethan theater, allows Shakespeare to build tension incrementally, culminating in the explosive confrontation at Bosworth Field. Each act serves a distinct purpose, from establishing Richard's villainous intentions in the opening scenes to unraveling the consequences of his actions in the final moments. This structural precision ensures that the audience remains engaged, drawn inexorably toward the inevitable climax. The pacing is masterful, with moments of introspection and soliloquy interspersed among scenes of political intrigue and battlefield chaos. By balancing these elements, Shakespeare creates a rhythm that mirrors the ebb and flow of power, mirroring the rise and fall of Richard himself. Language, too, is a cornerstone of Shakespeare's artistry in Richard III. His command of rhetoric is evident in Richard's soliloquies, which serve as windows into the mind of a calculating and charismatic villain. These monologues are not merely expository devices, but works of verbal virtuosity, showcasing Shakespeare's ability to craft dialogue that is both intellectually stimulating and emotionally resonant. Richard's opening lines, "Now is the winter of our discontent," are a tour de force of metaphor and irony, encapsulating the mood of the play, while introducing the protagonist's discontented spirit. Throughout the text, Shakespeare employs a rich tapestry of linguistic techniques, from biting sarcasm to poetic imagery, to convey the psychological depth of his characters. The interplay of formal verse and colloquial speech further enhances the realism of the dialogue, grounding the grandeur of the historical narrative in the immediacy of human experience. Characterization is another area where Shakespeare's genius shines brightly in Richard III. No character exists in isolation. Each serves a specific function within the larger thematic framework of the play. Richard, of course, dominates the stage, but the supporting cast is equally vital to the unfolding drama. Figures like Buckingham, Clarence, and Lady Anne are not mere foils to Richard, but fully realized individuals whose motivations and conflicts enrich the narrative. Shakespeare imbues these characters with distinct voices and perspectives, allowing them to interact with Richard in ways that highlight different facets of his personality. Buckingham's initial loyalty and eventual betrayal, for instance, underscore Richard's manipulative prowess, while revealing the fragility of alliances built on fear. Similarly, Lady Anne's fraught relationship with Richard exposes the tension between attraction and repulsion, love and loathing, that defines so many of his interactions. Through these nuanced portrayals, Shakespeare creates a web of relationships that amplifies the emotional stakes of the story. Symbolism and imagery permeate Richard III, adding layers of meaning to the text. Richard's physical deformity, for example, operates on multiple levels, as a literal representation of his twisted psyche, a metaphor for his outsider status, and a reflection of society's status, and a reflection of societal attitudes toward difference. The recurring motif of shadows and light further underscores the play's exploration of morality and perception. Richard often moves in darkness, both literally and figuratively, cloaking his machinations in secrecy while casting long shadows over those around him. Conversely, moments of revelation and confrontation are bathed in harsh light, exposing the truth beneath the facade. Shakespeare's use of such symbolic elements deepens the audience's engagement with the material, inviting them to interpret the play on multiple levels. Perhaps most remarkable is Shakespeare's ability to balance historical fidelity with artistic license, drawing upon chronicles by historians like Thomas More and Edward Hall. He incorporates factual details while reshaping events to suit the demands of drama. This synthesis of history and invention results in a work that is both informative and imaginative, offering audiences insight into the political machinations of the Wars of the Roses while exploring universal themes of power, ambition, and morality. The result is a play that transcends its historical context, speaking to audiences across time and culture. In sum, Shakespeare's Richard III exemplifies the playwright's mastery of dramatic technique, character development, and linguistic expression. Through his innovative use of structure, his vivid and multifaceted characters, and his richly textured language, Shakespeare crafts a tragedy that is as intellectually stimulating as it is emotionally powerful. The play's enduring appeal lies in its ability to provoke thought, evoke empathy, and entertain, all hallmarks of Shakespeare's unparalleled artistry. The legacy of Richard III extends far beyond the confines of Shakespeare's play, permeating modern literature, film, television, and broader cultural discourse. As one of history's most polarizing figures, Richard continues to captivate creators and audiences alike. His story adapted and reimagined in ways that reflect evolving societal values and artistic sensibilities. From best-selling novels to critically acclaimed films, Richard's tale remains a touchstone for explorations of power, ambition, and moral ambiguity, proving that his impact transcends the boundaries of time and medium. In contemporary literature, Richard's story has inspired a wealth of reinterpretations, ranging from meticulously researched historical fiction to bold speculative narratives. Philippa Gregory's The White Queen series, for instance, offers a revisionist take on the Wars of the Roses, presenting Richard as a complex and sympathetic figure whose actions are shaped by familial loyalty and political necessity. Gregory's portrayal challenges traditional depictions of Richard as a one-dimensional villain, instead emphasizing his humanity and the pressures of his environment. Similarly, Sharon K. Penman's The Sun in Splendor delves into Richard's life with painstaking detail, weaving a narrative that seeks to rehabilitate his reputation while remaining grounded in historical fact. These works exemplify a broader trend in modern literature to complicate and nuance historical villains, inviting readers to question established narratives and consider alternative perspectives. Film and television adaptations have likewise played a pivotal role in shaping Richard's cultural legacy. The Laurence Olivier's 1955 cinematic rendition of Richard III remains a landmark achievement, immortalizing the character as a swaggering, larger-than-life villain whose charisma masks a chilling immorality. Olivier's performance, marked by sharp wit and magnetic intensity, set a high bar for subsequent portrayals, influencing generations of actors and filmmakers. More recent adaptations, such as the BBC's The Hollow Crown series, have sought to bring a fresh perspective to the role, with Benedict Cumberbatch delivering a nuanced interpretation that balances Richard's intelligence and vulnerability with his ruthlessness. These portrayals demonstrate the adaptability of Shakespeare's text, allowing directors and actors to reimagine Richard in ways that resonate with contemporary audiences. Beyond direct adaptations, Richard's influence can be seen in the archetypes and tropes that populate modern storytelling. His character has become a template for the charismatic anti-hero, a figure whose intelligence and charm make them both fascinating and dangerous. This archetype appears in various forms across genres, from Tony Soprano in The Sopranos to Walter White in Breaking Bad. Like Richard, these characters navigate morally ambiguous worlds, driven by ambition and willing to transgress ethical boundaries to achieve their goals. Their complexity mirrors Richard's own, blurring the line between admiration and condemnation and forcing audiences to grapple with uncomfortable truths about human nature. In popular culture, Richard's name and image have been invoked to symbolize tyranny, betrayal, and the corrupting influence of power. Political cartoons, memes, and satirical sketches frequently reference Richard's infamous deeds, using his legacy as a shorthand for authoritarianism and moral decay. Such references underscore the enduring relevance of his story, demonstrating how historical figures can be repurposed to comment on contemporary issues. At the same time, Richard's rehabilitation by certain cultural movements highlights the fluidity of historical memory. Organizations like the Richard III Society advocate for a more balanced view of his reign, challenging negative portrayals and promoting research into his life and times. This ongoing debate reflects broader conversations about how societies choose to remember and sometimes revise their pasts. The discovery of Richard's remains in 2012 further cemented his place in the cultural zeitgeist, sparking widespread media coverage and public interest. The archaeological excavation and subsequent reburial of his skeleton transformed Richard from a distant historical figure into a tangible presence, bridging the gap between past and present. Documentaries, exhibitions, and commemorative events surrounding the find have fostered a renewed appreciation for Richard's story, encouraging people to engage with history in dynamic and interactive ways. This intersection of science, history, and culture exemplifies the multifaceted ways in which Richard's legacy continues to evolve, adapting to new technologies and methodologies while retaining its core significance. Ultimately, Richard III's enduring cultural resonance lies in his ability to embody timeless themes and provoke critical reflection. Whether portrayed as a villain, a victim, or something in between, his story invites audiences to confront difficult questions about power, morality, and the construction of historical narratives. By engaging with Richard's legacy, creators and consumers alike participate in a dialogue that spans centuries, connecting the past to the present and ensuring that his story remains a vital part of our shared cultural heritage. The story of Richard III concludes not with definitive answers but with lingering questions, unresolved controversies, and an enduring invitation to reevaluate the lessons embedded within his tumultuous reign. Historians, scholars, and enthusiasts continue to grapple with the enigma of Richard's character, torn between competing narratives that paint him as either a ruthless tyrant or a misunderstood monarch. Was he the calculating usurper immortalized by Shakespeare, whose path to power was paved with betrayal and bloodshed, or was he a victim of Tudor propaganda, his legacy distorted by those who sought to legitimize their own rule? These questions remain stubbornly unanswered, reflecting the complexities of interpreting historical figures whose lives are filtered through biased accounts and shifting cultural lenses. Central to the debate is the mystery of the princes in the Tower, a case that epitomizes the ambiguities surrounding Richard's reign. Despite centuries of investigation, no conclusive evidence has emerged to definitively implicate or exonerate Richard in their disappearance. Some historians argue that his consolidation of power necessitated their removal, pointing to the political expediency of eliminating rival claimants. Others contend that Richard's documented piety and adherence to legal precedent make such an act unlikely, suggesting instead that Henry Tudor or other opportunistic factions may have orchestrated their deaths. This lack of clarity underscores a broader challenge in historical inquiry: the difficulty of reconstructing events obscured by time, bias, and incomplete records. It also raises profound questions about the nature of guilt and responsibility, forcing us to consider whether historical judgment can ever truly account for the uncertainties of the past. Equally contentious is the question of Richard's physical deformity and its role in shaping perceptions of his character. Shakespeare's portrayal of Richard as a hunchbacked schemer has left an indelible mark on the public imagination, reinforcing stereotypes that link physical difference with moral corruption. Yet, the discovery of Richard's skeleton in 2012 revealed a man with scoliosis, but no evidence of a withered arm, challenging the exaggerated depictions propagated by Tudor chroniclers and later dramatists. This discrepancy invites reflection on how physical appearance has been used throughout history to vilify and marginalize individuals, often overshadowing their actions and achievements. By revisiting Richard's deformity through a modern lens, we confront uncomfortable truths about societal prejudices and the ways in which they shape historical memory. The ethical implications of Richard's actions also demand scrutiny, particularly in light of contemporary discussions about leadership and accountability. Richard's ascent to power was marked by a willingness to sacrifice morality for ambition, a strategy that secured his throne but ultimately led to his downfall. His story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of governance driven by personal gain rather than collective welfare. Yet, it also prompts us to consider the broader socio-political context in which he operated, a period defined by instability, factionalism, and the brutal realities of medieval warfare. To what extent should Richard's actions be judged against the norms of his time? And to what extent do universal principles of justice apply? These questions resonate deeply in an era increasingly preoccupied with the ethics of leadership and the responsibilities of those in positions of authority. Finally, Richard's legacy compels us to interrogate the processes by which history is constructed and reconstructed. The enduring fascination with his life reflects not only the intrinsic drama of his story, but also the malleability of historical narratives. Each generation reinterprets Richard through the prism of its own values and concerns, projecting onto him the hopes, fears, and anxieties of the present. This dynamic underscores the importance of critical engagement with history, reminding us that the past is not a static repository of facts, but a living dialogue between then and now. By revisiting Richard's story, we are invited to reflect on our own assumptions, biases, and blind spots, fostering a deeper understanding of the complexities that define human experience. In the end, the tragedy of Richard III is not merely a tale of one man's rise and fall, but a mirror reflecting the enduring tensions between ambition and morality, power and legitimacy, history and memory. It challenges us to embrace ambiguity, to resist the allure of simplistic narratives, and to seek meaning in the gray areas that defy easy categorization. As we close this chapter of Richard's story, we are left not with resolution but with an invitation to continue questioning, debating, and learning from the shadows of the past. As we reflect on the multifaceted legacy of Richard III, it becomes evident that his story is not one confined to the annals of history, but a living, breathing narrative that continues to evolve with each retelling. The unresolved controversies surrounding his life and reign, his alleged crimes, physical deformity, and ethical transgressions are not mere historical footnotes, but profound provocations that challenge us to grapple with timeless questions about power, morality, and the human condition. These ambiguities invite readers, scholars, and creators to engage deeply with his story, transforming it into a dynamic dialogue between past and present. One of the most compelling aspects of Richard's tale lies in its capacity to elicit diverse interpretations. Was he a Machiavellian mastermind who orchestrated his ascent through sheer cunning? Or was he a product of his environment, shaped by the brutal political realities of the Wars of the Roses? The answer depends as much on the lens through which one views him as on the evidence itself. For some, Richard's actions, his manipulation of familial bonds, his elimination of rivals, and his ruthless pursuit of the crown, mark him as an archetypal villain whose ambition knew no bounds. For others, his motivations may be seen as pragmatic responses to the precariousness of his position, driven less by malice than by necessity. This duality ensures that Richard remains an endlessly fascinating figure, his story a Rorschach test for our own values and biases. The discovery of Richard's remains in 2012 exemplifies how new evidence can reshape historical narratives, offering both closure and fresh avenues for inquiry. While the excavation confirmed certain details about his physical condition and final resting place, it also reignited debates about his character and legacy. The reburial, marked by solemn rituals and public commemorations, underscored the emotional resonance of his story, bridging the gap between academic discourse and popular imagination. This intersection of science, history, and culture highlights the ways in which Richard's legacy transcends traditional boundaries, inviting interdisciplinary exploration and fostering a deeper connection to the past. Richard's portrayal in literature, film, and other media further demonstrates the adaptability of his story, reflecting shifting societal attitudes and artistic sensibilities. From Shakespeare's iconic villain to modern reinterpretations that emphasize his humanity, each adaptation offers a unique perspective on his life and reign. These portrayals not only enrich our understanding of Richard but also reveal much about the eras in which they were created. For instance, Philippa Gregory's revisionist novels and Benedict Cumberbatch's nuanced performance in The Hollow Crown reflect contemporary desires to complicate historical villains. challenging audiences to see beyond binary notions of good and evil. Such works remind us that history is not a fixed entity but a fluid narrative shaped by those who recount it. Yet, perhaps the most enduring lesson of Richard's story is its ability to provoke critical reflection on the nature of power and leadership. His rise and fall illustrate the precarious balance between authority and accountability, reminding us that governance devoid of moral integrity is inherently unstable. In an age increasingly preoccupied with issues of ethics and responsibility, Richard's tale serves as a cautionary reminder of the dangers posed by unchecked ambition and the corrosive effects of fear-based rule. It challenges us to consider what qualities we value in our leaders and how we hold them accountable when they fail to meet those standards. Moreover, Richard's legacy underscores the importance of embracing ambiguity in historical interpretation. The absence of definitive answers about his life, whether concerning the fate of the princes in the tower or the extent of his culpability, forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge and the inevitability of uncertainty. Rather than viewing this ambiguity as a barrier, Thea can embrace it as an opportunity to engage more deeply with the complexities of history. By acknowledging the gaps in our understanding, we open ourselves to new possibilities, recognizing that history is not a static record but a dynamic conversation enriched by diverse voices and perspectives. As we move forward, the story of Richard III invites us to continue this conversation, to revisit his life and times with curiosity and humility. Whether through scholarly research, creative reinterpretation, or public engagement, there is much work to be done in unraveling the threads of his legacy. Each exploration adds depth and nuance to our collective understanding, ensuring that Richard's story remains relevant and resonant for future generations. In closing, the tragedy of Richard III is not merely a chronicle of personal failure or triumph, but a testament to the enduring power of storytelling. It challenges us to look beyond the surface, to question assumptions, and to seek meaning in the shadows of uncertainty. As long as we remain willing to engage with these questions, Richard's legacy will endure not as a relic of the past but as a vibrant, evolving narrative that speaks to the timeless complexities of the human experience. Richard III's story transcends its historical context to become a universal exploration of the human condition, inviting us to reflect on themes that resonate deeply with our contemporary world. At its core, his tale is one of ambition, a force that drives individuals and societies to achieve greatness but also carries the potential for destruction. In an era where ambition often defines success, Richard's journey serves as both inspiration and warning. His relentless pursuit of power underscores the seductive allure of achievement, while his ultimate downfall reminds us of the perils of unchecked desire. This duality compels us to examine our own ambitions, questioning whether they are guided by integrity or consumed by ego. By holding up Richard as a mirror to our aspirations, we are challenged to consider not only what we seek but why we seek it, and at what cost. The moral ambiguity embedded in Richard's story further enriches its relevance. Unlike traditional villains whose malevolence is absolute, Richard operates within a gray area, blurring the lines between admiration and condemnation. His intelligence, charisma, and strategic brilliance evoke respect, even as his actions elicit revulsion. This complexity mirrors the ethical dilemmas we face in our daily lives, where decisions rarely align neatly with notions of right and wrong. Richard's character forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about compromise, rationalization, and the ease with which good intentions can be corrupt. By engaging with his story, we are prompted to interrogate our own moral frameworks, recognizing that virtue is rarely absolute and that navigating ambiguity requires courage and discernment. Moreover, Richard's legacy challenges us to consider the broader implications of how history is constructed and reconstructed. The shifting portrayals of his reign, from Tudor propaganda to modern revisionism, highlight the subjective nature of historical narratives. Each retelling reflects the priorities, biases, and concerns of its time, reminding us that history is not a fixed chronicle but a living dialogue shaped by those who recount it. This realization carries profound implications for how we engage with the past, urging us to approach historical accounts with critical awareness and humility. By acknowledging the fluidity of history, we open ourselves to new interpretations and perspectives, enriching our understanding of both the past and the present. Richard's story also speaks to the enduring tension between individual agency and systemic forces. While his actions were undeniably consequential, they were also shaped by the political, social, and cultural dynamics of his time. The Wars of the Roses created an environment rife with instability, factionalism, and violence, leaving little room for nuance or compromise. In this context, Richard's choices, though morally questionable, can be seen as responses to the constraints imposed upon him. This interplay between personal responsibility and external pressures resonates profoundly in today's world, where leaders and citizens alike grapple with the complexities of navigating systems beyond their control. Richard's life invites us to consider how much agency individuals truly possess and how far accountability should extend when circumstances dictate action. Finally, Richard's enduring presence in popular culture underscores the timeless appeal of his narrative. From Shakespearean drama to modern adaptations, his story continues to captivate audiences because it embodies universal archetypes and themes. His transformation from marginalized outsider to powerful ruler taps into primal instincts about belonging, recognition, and self-worth. His descent into paranoia and despair reflects the fragility of identity when tethered solely to external validation. And his ultimate demise serves as a poignant reminder of the inevitability of reckoning, whether through justice, karma, or fate. These elements ensure that Richard's story remains perpetually relevant, offering insights into the shared human experiences of striving, failing, and seeking redemption. In essence, Richard III's tragedy is not confined to the pages of history or the stage of theater. It lives on as a catalyst for reflection, dialogue, and growth. By engaging with his story, we are invited to explore the depths of our humanity, the light and the shadow, the triumphs and the failures, the certainties and the ambiguities. We are reminded that history is not merely a record of events but a repository of lessons, waiting to be unearthed and applied to our ever-evolving world. As long as we continue to wrestle with the questions posed by Richard's legacy, his story will endure not as a relic of the past, but as a vibrant, evolving testament to the complexities of the human spirit. As this exploration of Richard III draws to a close, it is essential to emphasize that his story is not a static artifact, but a dynamic conversation, one that thrives on participation, curiosity, and diverse voices. Readers, scholars, and creators alike are encouraged to delve deeper into the intricacies of his life and times, bringing fresh perspectives and innovative approaches to bear on his enduring legacy. Whether through rigorous academic research, imaginative reinterpretations, or public discourse, there are countless ways to contribute to the ongoing dialogue surrounding Richard III. For historians and researchers, the unresolved controversies of Richard's reign offer fertile ground for investigation. Questions about the princes in the Tower, the extent of Tudor propaganda, and the impact of Richard's physical deformity on his rule remain ripe for exploration. Advances in technology, such as DNA analysis and digital reconstructions, provide new tools for uncovering evidence and revisiting established narratives. Collaborative efforts between archaeologists, geneticists, and historians could yield groundbreaking insights, bridging disciplines to create a more comprehensive understanding of Richard's life and legacy. Writers and artists, meanwhile, have the unique opportunity to reimagine Richard's story for contemporary audiences. Fiction, film, theater, and visual art offer platforms for exploring his character and reign through diverse lenses, challenging stereotypes and amplifying underrepresented voices. By experimenting with genre, style, and perspective, creators can craft narratives that resonate with modern sensibilities while remaining grounded in historical authenticity. Such works not only entertain but also educate, fostering empathy and critical thinking among audiences. Public engagement plays a crucial role in keeping Richard's legacy alive. Initiatives like exhibitions, lectures, and educational programs bring his story to life, making it accessible to people of all ages and backgrounds. Organizations such as the Richard III Society exemplify the power of grassroots advocacy, uniting enthusiasts around a shared passion for history and discovery. Social media and digital platforms further expand the reach of these efforts, enabling global conversations that transcend geographical boundaries. By participating in these initiatives, individuals can contribute to a collective effort to preserve and reinterpret Richard's legacy for future generations. Ultimately, the story of Richard III belongs not to any single person or group, but to humanity as a whole. It is a narrative that invites us to question, to imagine, and to connect, to find meaning in the complexities of the past, and apply those insights to the challenges of the present. As we continue to engage with his story, we honor not only Richard himself, but also the enduring power of storytelling to illuminate the human experience. Let us embrace this opportunity to deepen our understanding, broaden our perspectives, and carry forward the legacy of one of history's most compelling figures.